The banquet hall glittered under dazzling lights. Crystal chandeliers refracted beams of brilliance, making the vast ballroom shine as bright as day. At that moment, every gaze was fixed on the center of the stage. Luke White held a microphone, his voice steady yet merciless, like a cold blade slicing through the last shred of my dignity. Here I want to make a formal introduction. The woman standing beside me, Sophie, is the only wife I legally recognize. As his words fell, the room erupted in shock. Mockery, pity, and gloating looks all swept toward me at the edge of the stage, trapping me in the corner where spotlight and shadow met. The champagne flute in my hand trembled, tiny ripples spreading across the amber liquid. My name is Claire Rivers. For 3 years I have been Luke White's lawful wife, or at least until 10 minutes ago. And now, in front of everyone, he had pushed a woman who was once only his assistant into the place that should have been mine. Sophie nestled against him, a trace of triumph flickering in her gaze. The faint curve of her lips was almost imperceptible, yet enough to reveal her stance as a victor. Her fingers clung tightly to Luke's wrist, her waist encircled in his arm, as if declaring to the world that she alone was cherished. In fact, Sophie and I already registered our marriage 6 months ago. Luke's voice rang out again, calm as though he were reading a financial statement, without the slightest hint of guilt. The reason I chose to announce it today is not only because I no longer want to hide it, but also because Sophie is 3 months pregnant. I don't want my child to face any stigma before birth. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into thunderous waves. Guests rose one after another to echo him, their expressions brimming with deference. This was high society. Even when a marriage was publicly trampled, as long as you had wealth and power, there would always be people ready to cheer. All I could do was watch coldly, my nails digging deep into my palms, the sting forcing me to remain clear-headed. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of trust, collapsed in an instant into a cruel joke. At that moment, my phone buzzed violently inside my clutch. I didn't need to look to know it was my father, Richard Rivers, chairman of the Rivers Group and the wealthiest man in the country. The banquet was being live-streamed, and he had surely already witnessed this absurd spectacle. On stage, Sophie's expression grew more triumphant. Luke remained calm and unbothered, and finally, I drew a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows into the spotlight. My heels struck the marble floor with sharp, resonant clicks, each step like the beat of a judgment drum. Once again, every gaze in the hall turned to me, and the atmosphere tightened. Luke White. My voice carried clearly through the microphone clipped to my collar, calm enough to surprise even myself. Is everything you just said true? The ballroom fell deathly silent. The sound of breathing, the clinking of glasses, everything vanished, leaving only me and the couple on stage. Luke's brows furrowed, clearly not expecting me to confront him. He must have thought I would, as always, endure in silence, pretending nothing had happened for the sake of appearances. But he was wrong. Claire, this is something we can talk about privately, he said, his tone edged with warning, the rebuke of a man in power to someone stepping out of line. Why in private? I smiled faintly, mockery curling at the corners of my lips. Since you chose to announce it in front of everyone, why shouldn't I also say a few words here? A ripple of commotion spread through the audience. The guests were clearly intrigued by this sudden confrontation, and the reporters eagerly adjusted their cameras, ready to capture the rare spectacle. Sophie tugged nervously at Luke White's sleeve, panic flashing in her eyes. She always acted soft and innocent, but in truth, she was calculating and manipulative. I remembered that just 3 months ago, she was still Luke's assistant, pretending to be clumsy. Accidentally. Spilling coffee all over my custom-made gown. On my birthday, she had casually mentioned that Luke had spent the night with me, and even on our wedding anniversary, she suddenly appeared at our table as if by coincidence. Back then, I laughed it off, thinking it was chance. I even defended Luke, telling myself he was just too busy, that indifference was normal in marriage. Looking back now, I realize how foolishly naive I had been. Below the stage, phone screens lit up like a sea of stars, comments flooding in. The real wife is about to strike back. Poor Claire Rivers. This is outright humiliation. So much for love in business marriages. Meanwhile, my own phone kept vibrating, the word "Dad" flashing on the screen. I drew in a deep breath, pressed answer, and switched it to speaker. My father's steady voice filled the entire banquet hall. "Claire, are you watching the live stream?" The entire room fell dead silent. Even the cameramen zoomed in, capturing the glowing word "Dad" on my screen. Everyone knew it was Richard Rivers, head of the Rivers Group, the man who had sat firmly at the top of the rich list for years. "I'm here." I lifted my head, my eyes coldly locking onto Luke. There was a pause on the other end, and then my father's voice came again, icy as steel. "In that case, my daughter will divorce him publicly. Tonight, let the White Corporation go bankrupt." Gasps swept through the room, one after another. Cameras instantly swung to Luke, whose face drained of all color. Sophie's eyes went wide in shock, her lips trembling so hard she couldn't form a single word. The call ended, but it was like a nuclear bomb had been dropped into this extravagant banquet, unleashing a tidal wave. Luke was clearly shaken by my father's words. He rushed toward me, his voice lowered, urgent. "Claire, this is a misunderstanding. I can explain." I gave a cold laugh and stepped back, putting distance between us. "Explain what? That while you were using the Rivers family's resources, you were secretly plotting to cut me off and take down my family?" The flashes from the cameras were so blinding, it was hard to keep my eyes open. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The scene was more thrilling than any drama. Dozens of cameras locked onto us, ready to blast this chaos onto every headline. "Claire, stop making a scene here." Luke tried to snatch the small microphone pinned to my collar, his tone already edged with anger. But I slipped back swiftly, dodging his hand, my gaze sharp as a blade. "Luke White, don't you love going public? Then let's talk in public." With that, I turned toward the control booth. My fingertips tapped the switch, and the big screen, once playing White Corporation's promotional video, suddenly lit up with crystal-clear bank transfer records. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said with a calm, steady smile, "these are all the investments Rivers Group has made into White Corporation over the past 2 years, totaling $2.8 billion. The contract clearly states that if White Corporation or Mr. Luke White were ever involved in major credit issues, Rivers Group has the right to withdraw all investments immediately." Line after line of staggering amounts struck the crowd like heavy blows. Guests gasped, whispers spread like wildfire, and reporters nearly rushed the stage in their excitement. Luke's face went deathly pale, his pupils contracting sharply. How do you have these?" I smiled faintly. "How do you think?" I lifted my eyes and stared straight at him, my tone as cold as ice. "Don't forget, I'm not only your wife, but also the special supervisor my father appointed to the White Corporation." "Did you really think my father would hand over such massive funds to you without safeguards? He has never trusted anyone, not even his own son-in-law." The moment those words left my mouth, the hall erupted again. Some couldn't hold back their laughter, while others gasped in disbelief. Sophie could no longer sit still. She rushed forward, tears spilling down her face, her voice trembling but full of practiced theatrics. "Ms. Rivers, it's all my fault. Please don't blame Luke. We truly love each other. We really do." "Truly love each other?" I sneered, my gaze dropping to her slightly rounded belly. "Miss Sophie, you're carrying Luke White's child, aren't you?" She nodded through her tears, instinctively shielding her stomach, her frail demeanor designed to stir pity. I gave a faint smile, my lips curving into a chilling arc. "Then congratulations, but soon you'll understand. There is nothing a mother cannot forgive, except when someone dares to harm her child. And just now, you heard how my father responded." The instant my words fell, countless phones in the banquet hall rang almost simultaneously. Someone shouted that stock prices were plummeting. Another went pale, as they whispered that the White Corporation had drawn the attention of the Securities Commission, and an emergency investigation had already begun. Others fumbled to answer frantic calls, their voices trembling. Banks were demanding early repayment. The hall dissolved into chaos, panic spreading like a virus. Luke's phone rang as well. He answered, and within seconds his face turned ghostly pale. At last he realized my father meant every word. The bankruptcy proceedings against the White Corporation had already begun. The banquet was in turmoil, voices clashing everywhere, calls, exclamations, panic. Waiters scrambled to clear overturned glasses, while reporters nearly shoved their way to me, desperate to capture every second. In that moment, I stood at the center of the storm. I raised my left hand. Under the lights, my wedding ring gleamed brightly, a symbol in everyone's eyes of 3 years of marriage, of trust and legitimacy. But in my heart, it had long since become nothing more than a shackle. Slowly, I slid the ring from my finger. The scrape of metal against skin was cold and sharp, but it left me utterly awake. Through the microphone, my voice carried with calm authority impossible to ignore. For 3 years, I, Claire Rivers, have stood by you through every board meeting, taken part in every deal. No matter how outsiders judged our marriage, I fulfilled every duty as your wife. I paused, staring down at the ring in my hand, my smile filled with bitter irony. And yet, this is what I receive in return, you trampling my dignity before the eyes of the world. With a flick of my wrist, I cast the ring toward the center of the stage. It clattered across the marble floor, rolling with sharp, piercing sounds before stopping at Luke White's feet. From this day forward, we are finished. The hall fell into a dreadful silence. Everyone held their breath, eyes fixed on the lone ring. That single image carried more weight than any vow ever could. With a heavy thud, Luke dropped to his knees, fumbling to snatch up the ring. His voice shook, urgent and pleading. "Claire, don't. There's still a chance for us. I was wrong, I lost my head for a moment, but we can fix this." "Fix this?" I let out a cold laugh, my gaze sharp as a blade. "Do you even know where my bottom line lies? Do you think my father's patience is endless? Luke, these 3 years, whose resources have you lived on? Whose credit have you relied upon? And now all that's being asked of you is to return what never belonged to you in the first place." I turned away from him, my tone steady, yet more devastating than any scream. "As for the love you mentioned, leave it to the Miss Sophie in your arms." Sophie's face turned deathly pale, her tears streaking down like a mask of misery, yet no one stepped forward to comfort her. Everyone in the hall knew by now that Luke White was no longer a pillar worth clinging to. I stepped down from the stage, each stride steady and powerful, as if I were walking my own victory road. Cameras instinctively followed me. The woman in their lenses was no longer a humiliated victim, but the daughter of a tycoon, capable of summoning storms with a flick of her hand. Just as I pushed open the grand doors of the banquet hall, a desperate howl rose behind me. "Claire, you'll regret this." I didn't turn back. My voice was calm, almost indifferent. "Regret will never be mine." The heavy doors swung wide, and a rush of night wind poured in, sweeping away the thick perfume and alcohol that clung to the air inside. But it couldn't drive away the glare of the cameras chasing me. The entrance was already crowded with reporters, swarming like sharks scenting blood. Microphones, recorders, and cameras pressed in close, nearly surrounding me. "Miss Rivers, what's your response to Mr. White's speech tonight? Did you already know beforehand? Is there evidence of a third party interfering in your marriage? Will the Rivers Group fully withdraw its investments? Is the White Corporation facing bankruptcy?" Questions shot at me like arrows, sharp and relentless, yet I remained composed, a faint mocking smile tugging at my lips, my gaze frosty as ice. "Everything that happened tonight, you all witnessed it." I lifted my chin, my voice clear and unwavering. "The Rivers Group never nurtures ingrates. As for White Corporation's fate, I don't need to say more. The market will decide." The crowd of reporters erupted, shutters snapping wildly. In that moment, what they captured was no longer an abandoned wife, but a decisive and unyielding heir. Just then my phone vibrated again. On the screen the familiar name flashed, Dad. I answered softly, my tone gentler than before. "Dad." My father's voice was steady and severe. "Claire, don't be afraid. You did well tonight. Remember, this is not your shame. It is the end of the White family." "I understand," I murmured. He paused for a moment, then continued, his voice carrying calculation. "The White Corporation's capital chain is already broken. By tomorrow, banks, suppliers, and partners will all withdraw. As for Sophie, the child she carries is nothing but the White family's last bargaining chip. Pay it no mind." For a moment I fell silent, my fingers tightening around the phone. That so-called bargaining chip had once been the weapon that stole my marriage and shamed me. But now, under my father's precise strategy, it seemed pitifully insignificant. I drew in a steady breath, my tone clear and resolute. Don't worry. I won't give them any chance to rise again. After the call ended, I lifted my head toward the night sky. Neon lights painted the city in dazzling splendor, a sharp contrast to the iron resolve in my heart. At that moment, a reporter darted forward, blocking my path. Miss Rivers, have you considered remarrying, or is there someone supporting you from behind? I smiled faintly, my eyes detached. Behind me, there will always only be the Rivers family. With that, I walked straight toward the waiting black sedan. The driver was already holding the door open respectfully. The interior light cast my profile in stark, unyielding lines. The moment I sat down, the last trace of weakness in me vanished completely. That night, I ceased to be a wife trampled upon, and became Claire Rivers, the woman who held her destiny firmly in her own hands. The black car rolled away from the banquet hall, neon lights flashing past the windows one by one. The light from outside flickered across my face, shifting between brightness and shadow. The car was unnervingly quiet, with only the low hum of the engine, as if it were suppressing the storm of emotions swelling inside me. I closed my eyes, but memories from the past 3 years surged unbidden. I still remembered our wedding day. I wore a white gown, nervous yet full of hope. Luke White leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Claire, don't worry. I'll protect you for the rest of my life." Back then, I believed him without hesitation. I truly thought I was the happiest woman in the world. In the years that followed, I worked hard to blend into his life. Whether it was long board meetings or late-night hours of silent company, I was always there by his side. Even when he was cold and distant, brushing me off with excuses about work, I told myself he was simply under too much pressure. But reality told another story. Again and again, so-called coincidences revealed cracks in the truth. One day, outside his office, I heard Sophie laughing. "Mr. White," she said coyly, "I purposely left 2 pages out of this document so I'd have an excuse to stay longer with you." Her voice was sweet, deliberately provocative. I pretended not to hear, though unease pricked at me. Another time, when he came back from a business trip, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his suit. I swallowed my pain and forced myself to believe his excuse, that someone had accidentally bumped into him at a dinner. But later, in the corner of our closet, I found a scarf that wasn't mine, carrying a fragrance I knew all too well. The most absurd moment came on the night of our wedding anniversary. He brought Sophie to the restaurant with him, saying she was just assisting. Yet the triumphant glimmer in her eyes said everything I refused to admit. The truth was, these 3 years I hadn't been blind. I simply didn't dare face it. To admit it would mean my marriage had collapsed completely. From the corner of my eye, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was cold and sharp, a stranger compared to the naive bride I had once been. "Sophie," I whispered, so low it was almost inaudible, "do you really think scheming is enough to take my place? Starting tonight, you'll learn what it means to play the true games of the elite." Through the rearview mirror, the driver glanced at me as though wanting to speak. But in the end, he only slowed the car a little. He knew I needed no sympathy anymore. The sedan pulled into the familiar mountaintop villa. The courtyard, cloaked in night, stood solemn and imposing. This was the Rivers family's private estate, a place long regarded as a symbol of power. The iron gates opened slowly, one lamp after another lighting up, as though welcoming a victor's return. The moment I stepped out of the car, I saw my father's private legal team already waiting. A dozen attorneys in immaculate suits clutched thick folders in their hands, their expressions stern and unsmiling. There were no greetings. This was a battlefield without smoke or blood. My father, Richard Rivers, stood at the top of the steps. His presence carried quiet authority, his gaze heavy. For a fleeting second, I saw relief in his eyes, but it was quickly masked by icy resolve. "Claire," he said, his voice low and commanding, "from this moment on, Luke White is no longer our son-in-law. In this divorce case, I want him to walk away with nothing." I nodded, my eyes steady. "Yes, Dad, I understand." The attorneys moved swiftly into action. One stepped forward and handed me a folder. "Ms. Rivers, this is the draft of the divorce agreement. It includes the division of marital assets and the detailed clauses for withdrawing Rivers Group's investments from White Corporation. Please review it." I lowered my gaze to the papers, flipping through the pages. Each cold, precise line of text cut like a blade, severing cleanly the absurd marriage I had endured. The agreement clearly outlined that 90% of the funds Luke White had used to expand after the marriage came from the Rivers Group, and nearly all of his shares were pledged against that very capital. Once the investments were withdrawn, he would not only lose the White Corporation, but also drown in debt. Perfect. I closed the file, the corners of my lips curling into a cold smile. Let him taste what it means to walk away with nothing. My father nodded and immediately gave instructions. Tomorrow morning, the legal team will officially file the lawsuit. At the same time, submit the reports to the Securities Commission to expose the White Corporation's financial cover-ups over the past 3 years. I want every media outlet to see their downfall in the shortest possible time. Understood, the attorneys responded firmly in unison. I stood still, listening to their orders, yet my heart did not waver. The softness and hope I once clung to had burned away completely tonight, leaving only cold determination. The night breeze swept through the villa courtyard, the lights casting their glow across my face, illuminating the fierce resolve in my eyes. At this moment, I was no longer just Claire Rivers. I was the heir to the Rivers Empire, destined to stand above and look down over all. By dawn the next day, the news had already flooded every screen. Rivers Group withdraws investment. White Corporation's capital chain collapses. Luke White exposed for concealing marriage. Wealthy wife slams divorce papers on stage. Sophie's unborn child becomes market's joke. The headlines grew more sensational by the minute. The comment sections buzzed endlessly. Some condemned Luke White as heartless and disloyal. Others sympathized with me as the humiliated wife, while still others sneered at Sophie, mocking her for trying to steal, but losing everything instead. On social media's trending list, Claire Rivers, Luke White, and Sophie's pregnancy all ranked in the top 10. In just a few hours, the views had surpassed 100 million. Meanwhile, the Securities Commission and the banks acted in unison. The White Corporation's stock price plummeted the moment the market opened, falling limit down again and again. Investors frantically dumped their shares, while chat groups of traders filled with wails. At the White Corporation headquarters, the entrance was flooded with suppliers and employees demanding repayment, the scene chaotic beyond control. Elsewhere, Sophie curled up on the sofa of a luxury apartment, clutching her phone in a death grip. Her face was as pale as paper, the screen flashing endless trending tags and news headlines, each word like a blade slicing her carefully built facade apart. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening," she muttered, tears blurring her vision. Just last night she had stood at the center of the stage, basking in the world's congratulations. Now she had become the laughingstock of the entire internet. She had thought the child in her womb was her greatest bargaining chip, the key to becoming Mrs. White. Who could have predicted that this so-called bargaining chip would not only fail to protect Luke White, but instead become the final straw that crushed him? "Don't be afraid, Sophie." Luke's voice rasped as he stepped out of the study, his face haggard, bloodshot eyes betraying sleepless despair. Staring at the collapsing stock market data, he felt as if his chest were being ripped apart. "I'll find a way. I'll rebuild from the ashes." Sophie lifted her tear-streaked face to him, but the man before her felt utterly unfamiliar. He was no longer the calm, commanding CEO she once admired, but a broken man, crushed by reality. "Luke," her voice shook on the edge of sobbing. Maybe we should go to Ms. Rivers, beg her for mercy. After all, you and she had 3 years of marriage. Maybe." "Enough." Luke cut her off sharply, his tone laced with madness. "Do you really think she would ever let me go?" Terrified, Sophie flinched, tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks. At last, she understood, she had been nothing more than a pawn in this game. The true battle had always been in the hands of Claire Rivers and the Rivers family. In the spacious study, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across the heavy desk where the morning paper lay neatly unfolded. The front-page headline blazed with news of the White Corporation's collapse. On the television screen, footage showed the company's headquarters swarmed with angry creditors, the scene descending into chaos. I sat composed behind my desk, fingertips lightly tapping the porcelain edge of my coffee cup. My expression was calm. I wasn't just watching the news, I was watching the curtain fall on a play whose ending had long been written. Claire, this round, you won beautifully. My father entered, holding a thick stack of documents, his tone carrying rare approval. I lifted my head, my gaze steady as water. This is only the beginning. He smiled faintly and placed the file before me. This is the Overseas Cooperation Project the Rivers Group is about to launch. It was originally assigned to the task force, but now I want you to take it directly. I straightened in my chair, spine firm. You mean, you want me to enter the river's core? Not just the core, my father replied, his voice resolute, his sharp eyes glinting. From today on, you represent the Rivers Group externally. Last night's live stream and the uproar have etched your name into everyone's memory. Since that's the case, let's use this momentum to push you forward. For a few seconds, I stayed silent. Memories of 3 years of humiliation and endurance flashed through my mind. All the shame that once weighed me down had now become fuel, propelling me upward. I nodded, my voice firm. I will prove that I am not just Claire Rivers, but the rightful heir who can stand on her own. A trace of satisfaction softened my father's features, though his reminder was stern. Never forget, in this battlefield of commerce there are no eternal allies, only eternal interests. Luke White's downfall is the clearest warning. A chill swept my heart, but calm returned quickly. Yes, in this world, emotions are the weakest bargaining chip. Only power and profit can secure an unshakable position. Don't worry, Dad. I drew in a deep breath, my eyes burning with cold determination. I've learned never to soften again. Sunlight poured across my face, bright yet icy. In that moment, I knew my stage was only just opening. The towering glass facade of the Rivers Group headquarters glittered in the morning sun. Inside, the top-floor boardroom was packed. Every executive and shareholder in attendance, the air taut with tension. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and walked in with steady steps. My silhouette drew every eye. The click of my heels on the carpet wasn't loud, yet it echoed like a solemn beat in their hearts. Miss Rivers. Someone rose to greet me, their tone tinged with both respect and curiosity. Only yesterday, in their eyes, I was just the pampered daughter of a tycoon, a mere ornament at Luke White's side. But now, after the storm that shook high society, they were forced to admit that I had become the central figure at the eye of the storm. I stopped at the head of the table, sweeping my gaze over the room, calm but piercing. Starting today, I will fully take charge of the Rivers Group's core operations. This is not a choice, it is inevitable. The boardroom fell silent. Some exchanged glances, others coughed to mask their unease, but no one dared oppose me. Before their very eyes, the collapse of the White Corporation had become reality, and every step of it was tied directly to me, Claire Rivers. I continued, my voice steady and forceful. Some may doubt my age and experience, but last night, hundreds of millions around the world witnessed the White Corporation's collapse, and they saw how I defended the Rivers Group's dignity. That is the best answer I could give. The screen lit up, playing footage from the live stream at the banquet. Me slipping off my wedding ring, my cold voice declaring the end of all ties. The scene left many in the room transfixed, their gazes fixed on me. In that moment, I was no longer a discarded wife. I was the true shield and spear of the Rivers Group. I want all of you to understand something. My gaze swept across the shareholders one by one, sharp and unyielding. The Rivers Group does not need to cling to anyone, nor do we need any so-called marriages of convenience. We believe only in strength. From today forward, I will lead the Rivers Group into overseas markets, breaking into Europe's energy sector and Southeast Asia's infrastructure. Anyone who dares to challenge us will pay the same price as the White Corporation. The room erupted with startled murmurs, but none dared underestimate me. They all realized that the young woman before them had shed the shadow of her past and was rising swiftly to the peak of power. My father sat quietly on one side, his gaze deep, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. He knew the day he had long waited for had finally arrived. I set my hands lightly on the conference table, my voice clear and cold. From this moment on, only my rules will govern here. A week later, the cover of the world's most influential financial magazine featured a striking image. I stood in a black suit, hands clasped in front of me, my expression sharp and unflinching, the dazzling night skyline sprawling behind me. The headline was concise and powerful: From Wife to Heir, The Rise of Claire Rivers. The moment it was released, the cover went viral. Countless people marveled at the dramatic reversal of fortune, and my name became synonymous with strength, decisiveness, and untouchable authority. By contrast, Sophie's circumstances were utterly bleak. As the White Corporation crumbled, news of her pregnancy was magnified by the media, not with congratulations, but as mockery, fodder for idle gossip. She had thought the child would elevate her status, yet now she couldn't even secure a roof over her head. Luke White fared no better. Once the spirited, confident CEO, he was now drowning in debt, forced to sell off his houses and luxury cars. Rumors even spread of him kneeling before investors, begging for forgiveness. Those partners and friends who once surrounded him now avoided him like a plague. I sat quietly in my study, skimming the flood of headlines. When I read Sophie hospitalized, Luke White seen begging overnight for help, the corner of my lips curved upward. This is the price of betraying me. My father entered, placing a document on my desk. Claire, this is the final ruling on the White Corporation's bankruptcy liquidation. The official announcement will be released tomorrow. From then on, they will be erased from the business world. I closed the magazine, my gaze calm as water. Good. Let this be the period at the end of it all. Outside, the night was deep, the city lights blazing against the darkness. I lifted a glass of red wine, raising it gently as though in farewell to my former self. Luke White, Sophie. My voice was a low murmur, my lips curling with finality. From this day on, all you will ever see is my back as I walk beyond your reach. The wine swirled in the glass, reflecting the cold edge of my smile. In that moment, I was no longer the humiliated wife. I was the true master of the river's empire. And beyond these walls, public opinion had already settled on one conclusion: she is not a survivor, she is the ultimate victor. Under the relentless weight of the Rivers Group's offensive and the collapse of his empire, Luke White's life unraveled further with every passing day. Creditors hounded him at every turn, suppliers camped outside his once grand office, demanding repayment. The luxury cars that had once announced his arrival were towed away one by one, his penthouses listed for desperate auction. Sophie, once smug in her victory, could no longer bear the humiliation. Isolated, whispered about, and pitied by no one, she left his side in tears, carrying the very child she thought would be her ticket to power. She vanished from the spotlight, becoming nothing more than a fleeting gossip headline. Luke clung stubbornly to his pride. He begged old partners for favors, knocking on doors that once opened eagerly to him, but now slammed shut in his face. Each rejection etched deeper lines into his once confident features. The image of the calm, poised CEO had been stripped away. What remained was a man hollowed out by failure, pacing in empty rooms haunted by echoes of applause that would never return. One evening, he stood in the ruins of his last office, a bare, rented space with peeling paint. The television flickered with yet another headline: Claire Rivers signs landmark overseas deal. The world cheered her ascent, while mocking his fall. The same cameras that once adored him now recorded his disgrace. He gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles whitened, the words escaping his throat in a hoarse whisper. How did it come to this? But he knew the answer. His arrogance, his betrayal, his blind belief that love could be twisted into a weapon, all of it had led him here. When the final bankruptcy announcement hit the papers, Luke White's name was no longer attached to power, prestige, or wealth. It became synonymous with downfall, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and classrooms alike. The man who had everything, yet lost it all. In the end, while Claire Rivers stood tall as the heir who shaped the future of her family's empire, Luke White was left alone, drowning in the wreckage of his own choices, a forgotten figure, wandering the shadows of a city that no longer remembered him. Would you like me to write this ending in the same narrative voice from Claire's perspective, so she delivers the final reflection on Luke White's downfall? Epilogue. Luke White. The nights are the hardest. Silence presses down on me heavier than any boardroom, heavier than the stares of creditors outside my broken gates. I used to thrive in noise, applause at banquets, the chorus of phones ringing in my office, the hum of people waiting for my approval. Now there's only the hollow sound of my own breathing in an empty apartment I can barely afford. I see her everywhere, Claire. The woman I once dismissed as weak, too patient, too forgiving. She had stood beside me in every meeting, shielded me from whispers, even smiled through the cracks I left in our marriage. And I traded her loyalty for ambition, for Sophie's carefully crafted lies, for a false sense of power. When I close my eyes, I remember Claire's voice at that banquet, the calm edge of finality as she pulled off her ring and cast me aside in front of everyone. I thought I could control the story. I thought I could control her. But I was wrong. She wasn't weak. She was fire disguised as still water, and I was foolish enough to pour oil onto the surface. Now Sophie is gone. The investors are gone. My friends, my reputation, everything gone. I've become a name people spit out in mockery, a cautionary tale that parents use to warn their children about greed. And still, I can't let go of the image of Claire walking away that night, her back straight, her eyes cold, her heels striking the marble like war drums. I wanted to make the world kneel at my feet, yet it is I who kneels in regret, stripped of everything. If I could go back, just once, I would have chosen differently. I would have chosen her. But life offers no rewinds, only endings, and mine is to live with the weight of what I destroyed with my own hands.